welcome. This is Friday's edition of Between the Headlines, and of course the first show for the month of August. I'm Amina Taylor, broadcasting live from our London studios. Joining me on tonight's show, on my right, a warm welcome back for Keith Miller, the broadcast journalist, and alongside him, Claudia Webbe, the former advisor to the Mayor of London. Good to see you both, guys.
Yeah, well.
The papers are groaning under the weight of quite a mixed bag today, so without further ado, tonight's Between the Headlines picks are: without his beard, he looked more like the man the world knew as former Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic, seated with his translation headsets on. Karadzic listened as the presiding judge read out a list of atrocities contained in a 25-page indictment. What did the press make of the former Bosnian Serb leader's first appearance at The Hague? Well, we'll gauge their reaction, plus that of our panel, a little bit later on. And, well, it seems the gloves are well and truly off in the American presidential elections, but it's hard to say just who is playing dirty. Republican nominee John McCain's camp accused Barack Obama of playing the race card by suggesting his opponents were using the fact that he had a funny name and was non-white as a tool to scare potential voters. Is this the tip of the iceberg, or can voters expect things to get even more nasty in the run-up to November's race for the White House? Today's Guardian tells its readers of another potential famine in Ethiopia, but it seems it's not just a case of black faces being singled out for mention, as The Independent writes. The paper gives us an insight into the plight of impoverished white South Africans. Trust me, you'd want to stay tuned for that one. And those of you not so new to the show, you know that we've introduced a new section for you to wrap those little grey cells around. It's the BTH question of today, and today we're asking, is it naive to believe race will not play a central part in the US presidential elections? Your thoughts, please. And if you have any comments on the show, any of the topics you want to talk about, even give us a little slap on the wrist for stuff we haven't mentioned, then our SMS number, it's +44 7800008086. But let's have a quick look at the front pages. Kicking off with the International Herald Tribune, we're going with the shaven Radovan Karadzic there in the dock, staring straight ahead, looking rather grim, and some would say he has reason to be. McCain stakes out a negative position, they're arguing. An all-out offensive against Obama is led by Bush's 2004 aides. And the Financial Times, again, a very similar image of Radovan Karadzic in the dock, and energy company EDF bid for British energy in tatters, and BAE here linked to Zimbabwean arms dealer. And finally, the Irish Times, it seemed they had the same photographer at The Hague, because here's that image again. Karadzic unmasked is how they're putting it. Former Bosnian Serb leader appears in war crimes court. And a more localized story here, central banks revises growth forecasts downwards. All right, we're starting with that Karadzic story as well. And we've gone for page 15 of the Daily Telegraph. They say Karadzic protests at his arrest and refuses to plead. And there's also the startling claim by the former Bosnian Serb leader that the US promised immunity in peace deals. Well, Keith, we're going to go on to this immunity question from the US a little bit later on and ask your thoughts about whether this could actually be based in fact. But first, what a difference a razor and some shaving cream makes, it seems.
Indeed. I mean, much of the media spent most of the time talking about little nuances about how he appeared. He looked like the man they expected before. He was stern, he was upright, he was defiant, I would say. And I suppose they had to focus on that because for the first part he didn't really say much. He just, just stood there and looked like the man he was before. But I'm interested in something he said today with regard to the assassination attempt on him. He claims that the Americans tried to assassinate him. And, well, the Americans do have a bit of a history of knocking off leaders they're not particularly happy with. So I'm half tempted to believe that maybe they did try to bump him off, but eventually came to this deal whereby he disappeared. Unfortunately, he got caught.
Well, on the run for the better part, over 10 years, Claudia, finally captured, and some would say not so much captured as gently rounded up. Here we have the man we've known to be Radovan Karadzic, minus the beard. How do we think this criminal trial is going to pan out? Because it's unique The first Serbian general they had in there didn't even make it through to sentencing at all. So how do we think this is going to pan out?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's facing some very, very serious charges here. And in a sense, when we're talking about what he's been indicted for, what he's been charged with, the notion of ethnic cleansing, largely of Muslims, these are very serious charges indeed. And it's interesting to see him unmasked. And it's also interesting to hear his side of the story in terms of the notion that he had a deal with the US, and against that deal he would basically remain quiet and remain hidden. Now, all of that is, well, in a sense, he will have a lot of time in the court to lay out his case, and in a sense he's now on theatre. He's now on stage, and he will have a lot of time to share a lot of things. So a lot of people will have to get a lot of things in order in that respect, because he's now on a public platform in a way that is probably unprecedented. But nonetheless, these are very, very serious charges, and we've seen over the years, the history will show in terms of the sort of deaths of Muslims and so on. There will be a lot of people. He equally has a lot of supporters, but there will be a lot of people who will have been waiting for this day to have had justice in court, and they will feel some sense of vindication to see this man here on trial in this way. But at the same time, bringing him out on theatre in this way is also bringing out his ardent supporters who supported him through thick and thick, no matter what transpired, it would seem, and those supporters are still there. So this is a lot at stake here in a public way.
Should people be worried, higher ups? Because even though there's a general sense of scoffing in the press about how to deal with the US, come on, the desperate act of a desperate man with his last card to play, stranger things have happened.
Well, exactly. I mean, stranger things. He talks about his invisible advisor. Now, is he playing an insanity card? Is this a way to string out this process? I mean, if he is proved to be insane or not fit for trial, he gets off. And like you said, with regard to the Americans, the last trial of the Serbian general was 5 years, and he didn't get to the end of it. There's been criticism that this trial is being pushed through in order that he actually does get convicted.
Because Slobodan Milosevic did die whilst awaiting his form of justice, and others say, well, there was a question mark over that, as it is. Does it turn into the worst kind of pantomime, these particular cases?
Well, I think often they've got to think about how they can speed up these processes, because the longer they leave somebody on a public stage, theatre land in this way, the more publicity it attracts. And in a sense, whether it's positive or negative, the fact is not only will, in a sense, those people that are seeking justice have their day in court, but he himself is, in a sense, playing the court out in a big way. And so at the end of the day, will justice ever be served? Is this the right process? This is a test for the UN as much as it is a test for this chap, and I think we're going to have to wait and see on the outcome. But it would help, I think, if these processes weren't dragged out in the way that they are for so long.
I've got to ask, and clearly there are many viewers in Africa who will be saying, if this is going to be a farce, what hope, even though the International Criminal Courts that's threatening to indict Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir is a slightly different proposition, can we expect that the President of Sudan is now looking over his shoulder, wondering if he'll be next?
Well, it's taken 10 years for them to get Karadzic. It proves that eventually somebody can be caught. So maybe in 10 years' time, people will look back at Darfur and think, yes, you will face justice.
All right, then, your thoughts on that, please. But, of course, we're prompting you with a BTH question of the night, and we're asking, is it naive to believe race will not play a central part in the U.S. presidential election? Your thoughts on that one? +44 78 0000 8086, and it's bth@presstv.co.uk. Some of your text messages. This is from Professor Chipato in Zimbabwe, and you say, why are Europe and America increasing sanctions on Zimbabwe whilst the talks are progressing well? Don't they want peace in our country? From an unknown texter in Botswana, said democracy is a relative term. The problem is the West wants to impose their own understanding of democracy on other nations, and by doing so are propagating their own interests. Thank you very much for that one. All your thoughts, please. And, you know, if you hear something that a texter has sent in and you disagree, hey, let's play it out via SMS. Okay, page 16 of The Guardian today, and I could have gone for the same story on the front page of the IHT, but I like this one. Well, really, it's a question of the image. I think they got the shot right with this one. And they say, Obama accused of playing race card as presidential campaign turns nasty. Claudia Webbe, I've been waiting for things to get down to brass tacks with these two gentlemen. What's going on, and how are you reading it as a political animal yourself?
Well, this is where the campaign turns nasty. November's round the corner, and without a doubt, the notion of race is a factor in this election campaign. It was from the beginning, and it will be to the end.
But they've accused Obama of being black lights. You know, this is from old, hardened, seasoned civil rights campaigner who says, well, he's kind of black, but he's not black enough, is he? And now the Republicans are saying something else, saying he's bringing this out. So they're making it an issue only to counteract what he said about their candidate.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can see why the Republicans are making it an issue, because in a sense they don't want the perception of popularity that Obama has, and that no more was that felt when he traveled the world and you saw the sort of historic receptions that he received. But at the same time, they're wanting to say that America, Republican, actually is white, and is America really ready for a black president? They want to emphasize the fact that he is black, and what you're getting is not just a black president, not just a black family in the White House, but you're getting a Muslim president. The amount of Americans untold that still believe, regardless of Obama's protest to the otherwise, that he's a Muslim and has Muslim roots, and so on and so on. And no matter what Obama does to counteract that, the question is, why is he counteracting that historical root in the first place, and why does he feel the need to do so? Because he knows full well that it is a factor, not just on race, but on the fact of being Muslim. It will be a major factor, defining factor, as to whether he can tip and pip McCain to the post.
Well, Keith Miller, there are these badges doing the rounds in certain, I won't name places, I won't offend residents of those states, but they're saying it's called the White House for a reason. It was bound to come in.
It was right from the very beginning. Race was a factor. You have a black man with the name Obama, who looks nothing like presidents before, going for this job. There was no way you could pretend this elephant wasn't in the room. So I'm surprised it's taken this long for the media to finally wake up to this fact. And I find it interesting that this has come out at a time when McCain's side have been launching very, very personal attacks on him. And McCain promised that, no, this was going to be about policy, not personality. And Obama is being forced to defend himself against personal attacks.
The senator from Illinois being forced to defend his background?
He's being forced to defend himself, yes. Because, as you've said, he's proved to be incredibly popular, and they can't attack him on his policies, so let's go for what he looks like. He doesn't look like the right man for the job.
And one of the other means of attacking him is this idea that he's a celebrity. You know, he's in it for the fame game, Claudia Webbe. Don't we know that there's a certain level of face recognition that's necessary in this business, that's necessary in this game?
Well, politics and campaigning has indeed changed over time, and it's changed over time with the onset of new media, new technology, the internet and so on. So we are in a celebrity culture where politics and celebrity seemingly goes hand in hand these days. Actually, America had that as part of its processes long before even the UK woke up to recognize this, that there is a notion of the celebrity factor. But even more so, I think, where Obama has been successfully as part of, in terms of his campaign, is the way that he's used the internet and new media to get across his message, to reach out wider, to engage an electorate that were otherwise previously not engaged, the young, for example, in the way that he's engaged, the ability to raise funds using the technology, internet and so on. I think Obama has played this campaign in a way that, regardless of whether he wins or loses, politicians of the future need to sit up and take note with regards to the way he's handled the campaign.
All right, we'll leave that topic there. Moving swiftly on to page 35 of today's Independent. And we're going with two articles on what I believe is a general trend in Africa. It's South Africa wakes up to growing white poor. I didn't know there were any, quite frankly. Keith Miller, I thought pretty much everyone of the lighter hue did well out of apartheid. What's happening?
This is a tough one because I sympathise with people who are suffering, but when you look at South Africa, when you look at this particular story, they focus on the Afrikaans. Now, 79% of South Africa is black, less than 10% are white, and Afrikaners did pretty well out of apartheid, and the new government has only been in power for about 14 years, and that hasn't been a very long time to turn around an entire economy, an entire country. I mean, it took Europe longer than that after the Second World War, and they had a great deal of help from the United States. I'm finding it a bit difficult to feel that sympathetic.
Before I go to Claudia's reaction on this one, I'd want to point out to page 23 of The Guardian, and it's "The rains have come, the land is lush, but Ethiopians still go hungry." This image is one that one would most closely associate with poverty on the continent. In The Independent today and in The Guardian piece, they're almost given a similar level of coverage. One would argue one of the situations is clearly far more severe than the other, but is that a perhaps incorrect judgment to jump to?
I think it's a right judgment in the sense that the coverage has been on a par, and you would expect the whole situation in Ethiopia to generate that much more media coverage, and actually from across a broader range of media. But the fact that almost the impoverishment and poverty that is going on in Ethiopia, which has been generational over time. You know, we've grown up with this notion. There was a time when, of course, the whole situation of apartheid in South Africa, we often wondered, would it ever change in our lifetime? Well, actually, it has changed in our lifetime, but what hasn't changed in our lifetime to date is the eradication of the extreme poverty faced in Ethiopia, and the effects that actually what's going on in the West is actually affecting what's going on in places like Ethiopia, the famine that people are faced with. Now, of course, the 10% white population of South Africa that used to rule the majority, 90%, and you're far too kind to white South Africans in this regard. Of course, they're facing normal levels of poverty that you would expect in most countries at one level. But in a sense, they're not used to it, is what is
Makes
really...
it a little harder to deal with.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we want your thoughts on this one. And also our question of the night, we're asking, is it naive to believe race will not play a central part in the U.S. presidential election? +44 78 0000 8086. And just two more of your text messages from Kizito in Nigeria. Says, democracy, as we all know, is the government of the people, voted by the people, for the people. It will be oppressive for the ruling party to say that the replacement should take over from where his predecessor left off. 4th. And from Paul, it says the definition of democracy is the election of the leader by the people, not by the party. If an election is not democratic, then it's a dictatorship. And I could not let Miss Claudia Webbe wriggle out of the studio tonight without bringing up this story. It's page 3 of the Times. Miliband ordered to cancel trip as Brown seeks to restore authority. Claudia Webbe, what's going on in your party?
Well, you know, Labour, I believe, is faced with a stark choice, and I think the rise of Miliband this week is testimony to that stark choice, because in effect Miliband represents both, and that is either you change your leader or change your policies. In a sense, Miliband's presence on that stage, on the national stage, he would claim was about policy, was about looking at policy and so on, but actually it also raised his prominence amongst media speculation that he was...
well, we're talking about him.
he was vying for the leadership. And actually that is the reality facing Labour right now. Either we change our leader or we change our policies, one or the other. We either recognise that actually Brown as leader is the best we're going to have right now for the current circumstances, and therefore what we need to do is revamp some of the policies to address, for example, the sort of neoliberal economic policies that we've brought in from America, whereby we're now recognising, and even America recognises, you've got government intervening to bail out big business and so on. So these policies clearly haven't worked. So why is Britain following those?
Well, Claudia Webbe, I wish you were running. And very quickly, Keith, just want to say he's young, he's dynamic, he's the Foreign Secretary. Would he get your vote?
No.
Ooh, absolutely not. Well, I don't know if one GB needs to be looking over his shoulder. It's not for me to say. I'm a humble journalist. Well, guys, thank you so much for staying with us for the night. Let me thank my guest, Keith Miller, the broadcast journalist, and alongside him, suave political operator Claudia Webbe, who's a former advisor to the Mayor of London. And thank you so much for watching. Of course, the repeat of this program, it runs at 23:34 and 3:34 GMT. Now, please email all your comments to us. White South Africans in poverty, Obama, whatever you fancy. It's bth@presstv.co.uk. And that question of the day, please remember to drop us your response. We're asking, is it naive to believe race will not play a central part in the US presidential election? That number for you to get in touch with us on, it's +44 7800 008086. And I've got to tell you that messages are, of course, charged at your local operator rates. Well, I'm back on Monday. Jan Fosgaard will be keeping you up to speed with all the unfolding press stories over the weekend. Until then, from all the team, good night.